Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another fun-filled episode of vBrownBag. Tonight we are in the third and final episode of the Homelab
Oh, there's
series.
one more.
Oh, I lied. The 3 of 4. Thank you, Britton.
Yep.
3 of 4 of our Homelab series, and tonight I am very excited to have the man, the myth, the legend, VCIXINV. Twitter handle, Britton Johnson. Look, it's right there. It's amazing.
Yes.
How he got
No
it.
pressure.
It's so cool. Couple of quick notes. Please feel free to get in on the conversation. I will be monitoring the @vBrownBag Twitter handle and the hashtag vBrownBag. So make fun of us, throw tomatoes, we will have some fun listening to, how do you pronounce it? Nook, nuke, knock. Is there an umlaut? We don't know. Britton's going to set us straight. My name's Chris. I'm Mistwire. If you want to make fun of me personally, you're more than welcome to do that on Twitter too. So, without any further ado, make presenter. Shablam.
All right, let me get going here and grab the right screen. Yes. All right, do you have it?
I have the agenda.
All right. So whenever I watch these kind of presentations, I always see the presenter's agenda and I think, man, it's so boring. So
what did Cody do? What did Cody do to say thank you for? We have to make fun of him now.
Yeah. So Cody, this whole vBrownBag series on Home Labs was sort of the brainchild of Cody DeArkland and myself.
I did not know that. Nice.
We were talking back and forth on Twitter about some stuff, and we just sort of said, hey, we should, get online and broadcast, our labs and talk about stuff. And Cody's like, well, hey, that'd be a great thing for vBrownBag. And he brought in, Jonathan Frappier and all those guys. And I don't know if I said his name right just now, but
Frappattack, yeah, that's close enough.
All right. And so thanks
to knows how to pronounce it. Not even him.
So thanks to the really tall guy, Cody DeArkland, for pulling me in and getting this thing going. It's been an exciting series to watch, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So that's my agenda slide. I'm going to show you stuff, and then hopefully nothing breaks. But I was telling a friend before we started, I half broke my NSX implementation yesterday, so hopefully it's half fixed as I go through this.
Pressure.
So I am Britton Johnson. I am a independent IT consultant, which means I work for my clients, not necessarily for myself. I spent the first 16 years of my career supporting small and medium-sized companies internally, and went out on my own full-time in 2017 with the general goal to, help companies solve their IT problems that maybe they don't have the staff internally to solve themselves, and so I can come in and be an expert in an area they may not have staff to fill up. So small enterprise is sort of my niche. And I hate IT waste when I see companies buying things that they necessarily don't need, or maybe they bought the wrong thing when they should have got something else. And so I try to help small companies who don't have their feet in all kinds of different areas of expertise to find the right thing. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. And I've got a bunch of letters after my name as well. So, okay, so I'll go through a few slides here, and then I'll try some demo stuff here, and we'll see kind of how things go. Home lab or cloud lab? So I initially had just a straight up home lab with a bunch of old HP servers, and eventually I thought, hey, why not do both? And so that's sort of where it went. And I wanted to kind of do as much stuff in, VMware on AWS when that was released. And so I started looking into that, but the vSphere on AWS it's sort of the unicorn, I think, of IT. I mean, everybody wants it, but nobody can afford it. Especially in the small side, if you're, a $1 billion company, it's a no-brainer to go for it. But for companies who have 3 or 4 hosts, a little bit of an overkill. For a home lab, it's even more overkill. but I kind of wanted to try to replicate some of this stuff, in a lab. And if you haven't ever seen the numbers for VMware Cloud on AWS, it's staggering. I don't know if this has been updated since I pulled this into last year, but it's not entirely cheap to just throw it all out in the cloud. But so I started developing a plan then for what I like to refer to as the Super Hybrid Homelab, which is an overly hyped name to make it sound cooler than it really is. But I like it. So after being disappointed not being able to use VMware on AWS because it costs almost as much as my house, I started building out the on-prem side again of what would be this new lab. Goals when I went into this, I wanted to do a full vSphere deployment on-prem and in the cloud, have it all networked together with NSX because what else would I use? And I wanted to be able to use some legacy hardware, keep things cheap, and a couple nice to have things in there for some public routable IPs, building two-factor authentication, because anytime you're going to outside of your home, it's probably a good idea to have some extra security. Just something to keep in mind. And then if I can get there, layer 2 VPN, which that's part of what broke. So hopefully that works. Some history on this though, I had to just kind of rebuild things a little bit. But so this is initially what I had a bunch of servers sitting on, this really cheap, rickety old IKEA shelf in my basement.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think we all started there. I bought 2x4s and glommed them together for my first one.
Oh, just you wait. And so I had a couple of old HP G5 servers sitting on this thing, and then I also had a couple more sitting on an old music stand that I have in the basement. I don't know why I have a music stand because I don't play any instruments, but I do for some reason. And then as I was kind of tearing this apart to rebuild it into a different form, I discovered by accident that the music stand server stand was actually load bearing and keeping the IKEA shelf from falling over. So I was like, oh, that's a good thing I'm rebuilding this. So enter what I now refer to as the Cull Lumber Rack. Anybody who's a fan of Home Depot knows that you can find good stuff in the Cull Lumber bin. So I had some spare parts laying around the basement from some home improvement projects and just cobbled this together. And I actually really like it because it's extraordinarily functional.
That looks very familiar. That's amazing.
It's basically a bunch of 2x4s. Some are green treated, some are not. I rebuilt my deck last summer, so that's some leftover parts from that. And just kind of threw things together just to sort of get things working. And this won't fall over on me, which is nice. So
if I show this to my wife, she'd be like, "Oh my God, he built the same thing you did." I'm having flashbacks. This is amazing.
And like I wanted to just build something that was
it works. It's amazingly well. Yeah, they're fantastic.
It's sturdy. Yeah, it's sturdy. It's functional. It could light on fire if it gets overheated. I mean, what could go wrong?
Yeah, you can't move it for shit, but it's great.
No. I mean, and that spot where it sits on the basement floor there, I had some water leaking through an old basement window above that for the last few years, which I finally got cleared up. So the most important thing to me was having stuff a few inches off the ground in case it does actually decide to leak again. And and of course it's not level at all because there's these giant cracks in my basement floor, and so the rack itself isn't level because the floor's not level.
Details.
And exactly. I don't know how long I'll use this thing, but knowing me, it'll probably be a few more years before I redo this, or I'll just have everything in the cloud by then. We'll see. So my on-prem list, I started off with probably one of the more important pieces of this whole build was buying a Fortinet 60D firewall for my home firewall. I became a fan of Fortinet at my last day job. They had them, and I really like the way they work and how they don't force you to do everything in command line, and everybody's kind of got their what they like for firewalls, and when it comes to hardware firewalls, I tend to fall on the side of Fortinet because they generally just work well and they're not overly expensive. I actually found this thing at a deal at $350 online with 3 years of services from them. So I kind of got lucky with finding this one. And of course, the typical home network switch of Ubiquity's edge switch. I mean, the Ubiquity stuff, you really can't beat it pound for pound, dollar for dollar. Their stuff is just unbelievably functional. Before I got the Fortinet, I was using a Ubiquity Unified Security Gateway, the USG firewall. Mm-hmm. But for some of the advanced kind of IPsec tunnels and some of the other things I was trying to do with it, it just wasn't cutting it, so I had to upgrade to the Fortinet. So then the main host there was an HP DL380 Gen 9 that I bought. This is probably the biggest expense in the whole build, and I found it also on a deal online for $1,500, and I put some RAM in it, put some old hard drives in it. Thankfully HP still lets you use non-HP drives. It'll complain about it, but it will. They do work. And then I still have that old DL360 G5, and man, you can still get some good use out of these G5s, even in vSphere 6.0. So until 6.0 stops working, you can still use them.
Nice.
I'm gonna milk this thing for everything I can. I'm gonna have to replace it probably next, and I think when I do, it'll probably just be with another cloud host. And then and we'll get to that later. But so I have
real quick. We have a couple of comments from everybody that's watching.
Sure.
Craig Herring has posted a link. So I've posted that in the chat channel for a 42U rack for $269. So
wow.
I've posted that in there. It doesn't have any walls on it or anything, but it does have casters and bracers at the bottom of it. That's actually a fantastic deal. So I posted that links.
From who?
It's StarTech, startech.com.
Oh,
42U adjustable depth open frame.
Oh, okay, one of those, yeah.
Yep. Let's see. Charles Graham Mitchell is talking about his nuts again. Oh no, excuse me. He's talking about cage nuts. Okay, whatever. It's Graham. And he's got pics. We don't want to see pics. Don't HP blog. And Charles Adams got a FortiGate 60E for his home lab. Also installed heavy-duty wheel casters to move around. So everybody that's watching has got like ridiculously jacked up home labs. This is awesome. So we're speaking to the right audience here.
They're putting me to shame, is what they're doing.
No, not at all. No, this dude. If I had a Gen 9, are you kidding me? No.
Yeah.
No. Oh, and Graham's got one of the StarTechs too. He says he likes it. Cool.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like, I might do it, but I still like sort of the rugged, Tim the Toolman Taylor factor of building it yourself, So.
I had mine for years. I absolutely love that thing.
Yeah. So, I have a lot of onboard storage on both of the servers just because I'm a fan of onboard storage. But I also picked up a Synology NAS cheap that I found somewhere, and so I use that for when I need iSCSI storage to float between hosts, and actually just added an Intel Nuke. I'm going to say it's pronounced Nuke, just for fun. And it's only one of the ones that can take 16 gigs of RAM. I know there is a manufacturer I found out there that makes apparently 16 gig, you can get two 16 gig RAM chips that work in certain versions of the Nuke.
Right.
That will fake it out and give it 32 gigs, but your mileage may vary.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that was almost going to be the same cost as the device itself, the box itself. So I was like, I don't need it I don't need the RAM that badly. And I kind of just added that just to see how well it would work. Right now, the only thing I have running on it is NSX Manager. But, it runs. So, and I had a couple of old Belkin UPSs laying around that had dead batteries in them. I put new batteries in, and thanks to Amazon.com, we're relatively safe in case the power decides to go out. So side note about power, this thing is sitting right next to my main power panel for the house in my basement. And I was down here last night working, and all of a sudden I could hear something buzzing inside of the fuse box. And I'm like, well, that's not right. And then I discovered this morning when I went to try to go somewhere that all of the power in my garage was out. So somehow or another, some squirrel or something chewed some outside power lines and tripped the breaker on my garage. So be careful where you put your server rack in your basement, because if the power panel blows up, could have some problems. So that's sort of how I built things on-prem, and I've got for VMs on there. I mean, I've got a whole giant list of stuff. But the thing that we're all trying to get to here is the SDDC, the software-defined data center, and my wife built this graphic for me because it's our
nice.
It's our hope of someday never again having to worry about hardware, and everything is software-defined, and it's just this long off-sought thing that nobody wants to ever have to deal with this stuff again. But it's for some of us we're there, and I'm a little jealous that you're somewhat there, Chris, with AWS.
I dream of a time when everything's CloudFormation templates.
Yeah. And it's but for those with a tight budget, it's hard to get there, so we have to still build stuff ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the cloud list, as I started kind of figuring out, okay, I want to plug this thing into cloud services. How can I do that? I went kind of on a search for the last kind of couple of years, and I could never really find something that would work well. And of course, everybody's seen, the myriad of cloud hosts and services and things that are out there. And all of them, I would say just about all of them, save for one, are built and priced for large enterprises, really. I mean, you can get away with doing some stuff on a budget on Azure and the free tier and Amazon on the free tier, but you're going to hit the ceiling of the free tier pretty quickly. But it's good for learning stuff, especially if you're just standing up networks and, doing some basic things that don't take a lot of compute power. But I went to VMworld last year and started walking around and found this company OVH right in the middle of the show floor at VMworld. And I'm like, who are these guys? Never heard of them before, and come to find out they're like the Amazon Web Services of Europe. And they're really big in France, and they've got stuff all over the place. So I looked them up right after I got back from VMworld, and I stood up. Right after VMworld, I went on vacation with the family, for that weekend up north in the North Woods of Wisconsin. So there's like no cellular coverage up in the North Woods of Wisconsin. But in the North Woods, from my phone, I ordered, provisioned, and built a ESXi host in France. And I'm like, as I did this, I'm just like, okay, this is a game changer, because like you can do this now. And what was really mostly shocking to me was it didn't cost that much. So the first host I bought from them was a 64 gig host. It's got a Intel Xeon D, which is a lightweight processor, but if you're doing lightweight stuff, it's not that big of a deal. And storage is usually the bottleneck anyways, but then that's pretty light on here as well. But I mean, you get what you pay for with their stuff, and if you want higher performing stuff, you can buy it. But if for labs especially, if it's down to buying a $2,000 server or spending $75, $80, $100 a month, especially if you only need it for a short period of time, then these guys start to look like a really good option.
Is that a dedicated host, or is that a virtual host?
It's a dedicated host. It is your box.
Wow.
And, like most of the ones that I've been playing with from them are hosted out of their, I believe it's pronounced Beauharnois, Canada.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, thank you. And like this was the price that it was back last November. Their pricing has gone up since then, as things naturally do.
And OVH is the company that bought vCloud Air, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And they're, because of that, they are launching into the United States with a vengeance. They just opened up their Vint Hill, Virginia data center, and they have if I can bring this over here, I just found this just before the show. So a little small promotion for OVH, who I do not work for. They have their US East data center. They have a 2-day promotional price where you can buy a host from them for $70 a month right now. It's good through for the 23rd. And so I actually just bought one just before the show just to have it, just because I think I'm gonna end up adding one, and I might keep it for a while. I might not. We'll see. But I've just been, as I've been sort of building stuff with their products, I've been just more and more and more impressed with how well it works, and how fast things are, and what you can all do with it. So the cloud list again, I've got the Fortinet connecting everything together. I have the one. At one point I had 3 OVH hosts, and I was linking all their stuff on their internal VRAC thing. You can actually link hosts together between their data centers on their service called VRAC, and it's gigabit between the data centers. So you could have a host in Canada, you could have a host in France, you could have eventually when they get the US one fully online, you can hook that up, and it's all internal. None of that traffic goes out over the web. It's just internal traffic between their hosts and the data center.
Nice.
So you can kind of build your own cluster of servers running VMware in their data center for all intents and purposes. So then, I've got Azure running a single Windows instance. I've got my, private 3CX IP PBX VM running up there, which is my phone just for my office and for my business. And then, I run that on my partner credits from Microsoft. And then Ravello, I'm waiting to hear back from them on getting my vExpert credits added. I did a trial with them a while back, and so I'm waiting to get that turned on. As soon as I get my Ravello vExpert thing turned on, I'll start to add that in as well.
Nice.
So the goal was really at some point, like I wanted to bundle on AWS, I wanted to bundle on Azure, I want to bundle on as much stuff as possible and just have things, going all over the place.
So you're gonna run IPsec VPN to all of these different providers, one to OVH,
correct.
One to Azure. Nice. Yep. Very cool.
Yep. And eventually, I because of my ISP at home, I have to pretty much do most of those tunnels from the Fortinet. I haven't got, because like the one Achilles heel, as far as I'm concerned, of NSX is it doesn't accept a DHCP WAN address. So I can't plug my fiber from my internet provider into my VMware host and have it pull an IP address. So I have to run stuff through a firewall, and I probably could do some fancy port forwarding and stuff, but I like to have the edge.
Couple of questions from the gang. The NUC server, what is the purpose of it for your setup? I think you said it was your NSX manager.
That is today, and I'll show you that. I'll show you that once I get into the demo here in a little bit.
We'll get into that. One other question was, what was the uplink for the OVH dedicated servers? How many NICs?
So the one that I got has two NICs built into it. That there are higher end servers. I think they go from 2 to 3 to 4 to a whole bunch. So it just depends on which one you end up buying in their list of stuff. I mean, if you go to, I think it's just their websites are a little confusing right now because they're in such transition as a company from just starting up their U.S. business and they've got their existing worldwide business. So if you go to ovh.ca, you'll get to the Canadian site, and you'll see a bunch of offerings there. If you go to ovh.us, you'll see a bunch of stuff there, and it's they're not linked up at all yet. So like my host that I own that's in the Canada data center, I have to log into one control panel for that. The host that's in my US data center, I have to log into a different control panel for that. So I'm hoping that in the future OVH will get all this stuff kind of ironed out, but I think this is just what happens when you acquire vCloud Air.
I'm hoping they're going to give you some money for all this free press you're giving them.
You have to eat that elephant. Yeah. So I'm just, like I said, I when I found them, I just became a fan, and I love what you can do with it.
Right.
So I've got a bunch of stuff stood up. The process, however, of building one of these cloud hosts with OVH is not necessarily totally straightforward, because the way they deliver the host to you is once you kind of pick your operating system, they send you an email when it's done with an IP address and a password, and they actually put the management interface of the host on a publicly accessible IP address, because how else would you get to it? Mm-hmm. And that public management IP is hard locked to the MAC address of the host, so you can't reuse that public IP once you get things built out. You have to buy or activate another public IP address that you can then use for all your other services. So you have to kind of like quick log in, configure some stuff, and then eventually, just to keep things secure, turn off that public management IP and, lock down your host so that, it's not totally exposed for too long. So it's one of the things where once you buy it, you want to kind of get through the process as quickly as you can to lessen your attack vector, as the bad guys like to call it.
Right.
So, and I generally, when I build stuff with them, I have, I log into the host, get connected, I upload a virtual firewall. I've used the pfSense Community Edition. I've also used the Fortinet VM, the FortiVM, which is really nice for this, and because they have like a 2-week test trial where you can use one for free. And then, I usually I'll upload and build a Windows machine right on the host and do all the provisioning of the host from the host. Just kind of makes things a tad, simpler when you're not doing it all off of the remote public IP. And get that, IPsec tunnel up or some other tunnel to the host up as quickly as you can, so you can shut off the public management IP and get things moved over. This is my second go around with building stuff on-prem and in the cloud. The first time around I did it, I actually built everything NSX and the whole bit running on the OVH host, and then I had decided to kind of run it over again. And when you're doing this kind of stuff, what I've discovered here is, especially with NSX, the Edge Services Gateway really carries its weight and then some. If you're not overly familiar with NSX, I mean, a lot of people, when you hear NSX, all you ever hear about when people are talking about it is microsegmentation. That's the main kind of pitch that people always talk about is, oh, you can microsegment this, you can microsegment that, but the thing that doesn't get a lot of attention is some of the other network features, and the big one is the Edge Services Gateway. I mean, this thing can pretty much literally replace a lot of, if not all of, a rack of routing hardware, and put it all in software. It's unbelievable the amount of different options that you can do with it.
It's pretty amazing.
It really is. I mean, and I'm hopeful that they will put a little bit more development into the SSL VPN service, because it works well today, but it's not great. That's my one kind of knock against it. And I think it's one of the things where VMware knows that not a lot of people are going to use it. You're limited to a certain number of users per edge. And it's, while it works, it's not a very smooth interface to work with. But and that's you'd only really use that, if in an environment where you had like a laptop or something that wanted to connect into your network from remotely. Excuse me. So yeah, so that that's sort of kind of where I started building with stuff, and I'll kind of show you where we're at here with respect to the lab. All right, so I have things kind of split out in different clusters, as you will, and NSX is a cluster kind of based product where it only deploys to certain clusters. So if you don't want something to be covered by NSX, just don't prepare it, or put it in a cluster that's not prepared for NSX. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they understand server virtualization, they understand all this kind of stuff, but when it comes to network virtualization, it's just like, oh, it's too scary. It's something for the network guys, right? And it's like, I was one of those server virtualization guys who was kind of scared by networking and got into this, and I'm just like, this is really not that bad, and it's just the things you can do are just incredible. So I have, like I said, my 4 hosts, the NUC that I have out here. Yeah, right now, pretty much the only thing I'm running on it is the NSX Manager appliance. It runs fairly well. I mean, it's actually only using just under 8 gigs of RAM, and that VM requires a full 16 gigs. So, it's I've seen other guys build their labs with multiple NUCs, and it's one of those things where, like, since I'm going to be building a lot of stuff in here that I'm going to eventually build for customers. And so, like, when I did a VMware Horizon deployment, I built all that in my lab, and I wanted to actually have some real servers to run that off of. So that's why I mostly invested in the Gen 9, was so that I would have some of that, extra horsepower to really see, what a customer's deployment would really look like.
The Verona is the Gen 9?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So then here's my OVH host, and it's running pretty hot right now, but in general, I have no complaints with it ultimately. But let's see, where shall we go? You can see I've deployed a whole bunch of junk out here, and most of this is all turned off or dead because it's from labs in ages past, and I just refuse to delete things. That's why I have so much storage. Because you just never know, when you're going to want that remote desktop services host to come back up, So what I started working on, I have the FortiGate is connected to a virtual FortiGate on the OVH host, and I wanted to get everything moved into NSX, and I had it once before, but I did it a different way, and I'm trying a different way this time. Like I did IPsec tunnels, so I moved from an IPsec tunnel to an IPsec tunnel, and now what I'm trying to do is deploy an edge services gateway that lives in the on-premise lab, and then and connect it with a layer 2 VPN tunnel to the OVH edge services gateway, so that I can extend layer 2 VLANs, from my home lab site to the OVH site, and it's kind of working. I haven't been able to spend a whole lot of time in it yet, so that's my excuse for it not working perfectly for this demo. But you can see, at least in here, the tunnel is up. And I've got 2 VLANs connected across it, and and I can ping from one side to the other. What I haven't done the math on yet is where my default gateways need to be optimized and things of that nature. As I take a drink, is there any other questions popping up?
Let's see. Comments, but no questions.
All right. Okay. So that's the sort of the thing that I'm working towards at this point. And I had, like I said, the thing that I was trying to do was convert the host management networking on the OVH host to run it over the layer 2 VPN, and subsequently that has broken part of my NSX deployment, and I've got to dive into that to figure out what I did wrong. Because effectively, when you have with this OVH host, you effectively have more or less a host with one NIC on it, and to try to to do some of the stuff that you want to do with layer 2 VPNs, you have to use a distributed switch, and you're kind of trying to fool the system into moving the one NIC into the distributed switch, which I have done, but I'm having a hard time getting the VM kernel NIC interface moved from the standard switch that it's on now, which is connecting over the IPsec tunnel, into the distributed switch and running over the layer 2 tunnel. So I spent about 6 hours on it last night, banging my head against it, and was not successful. And I even found an article from William Lamb and from William Lamb's blog about how to do it with a NUC, and he got me a little bit further, but in the end, the way that I was trying to do things, it's just not taking for some reason. Like I could get it moved, but then it doesn't communicate. So this is just all part of having a home lab, is just going through this kind of stuff and figuring out,
Yep.
how you get from A to B. And it's like at the end of the night, last night, it was like midnight, and I'm just like, I wanted to have a successful, show and tell of how this thing works. But ultimately, as I was talking to Cody a couple of weeks ago about this, he's just like, if stuff doesn't even work, that's something else you can talk about, because this is part of having a lab, is you break stuff, you try again. And,
So,
it's true.
It's kind of funny that you say that, because Cody and I did a 3-parter. Well, actually, it was supposed to be a 2-parter, but it turned into a 3-parter because the second part was his live demo, and the entire hour everything went wrong, and literally everything he touched broke.
Wow.
So we did a part 3 where he troubleshot, and he went away, figured out everything that hosed, and then he came back, and then we redid it re-recorded as a part 3, and then put all 3 up with lessons learned. So you're absolutely right. Having grinding it out in a home lab is the way that a lot of us figure these things out. Well, a couple of questions from the audience. Craig wanted to know, how did you get your NSX licensing?
So
is it a delicate question?
It's not a super delicate question. I got it because I'm a vExpert. So it's part of the package of being a vExpert. In my private company business, I am a VMware partner, but I have not been blessed with being an NSX approved partner yet. So I've been trying to work on getting that done, but because I don't have another person working for me that helps me meet the requirements, they won't give it to me, which is not unfair, but still. So I would get NSX licenses through that if I could meet those requirements, which I eventually will. But for now, I'm using NSX licenses from vExpert. And when I first started getting into working with NSX, even just as a customer for my employer at the time, I wanted to be able to stand up NSX in my company lab, my work lab, and at the time, NSX was brand new, and they weren't letting anybody do anything with it unless it was supervised. Right. And I basically had to beg, plead, borrow, and steal, just short of steal, even the bits just to install it. Back in the day, and so if you really want to get into this, if you wanted to be able to deploy it yourself, because quite frankly, NSX is one of these transformational technologies that, and I say this to people all the time, until you've installed NSX 10 times, you don't know how to install it properly. It's not something that you can just go into your business or go into somebody's data center or go in here and just do. It's just not that, it's just not that simple, because I mean, I've been working with a client on doing an NSX implementation in production, and we had 4 meetings before we ever even installed the NSX Manager appliance just to get ready for it. I mean, it's one of these things where if you want to learn it, talk to your VMware reps, bug your partners, bug whoever you can, and because people can give you trial keys especially if you're a potential customer. VMware's not gonna say no to somebody who might actually buy it. At least that's my kind of outside perspective on it.
Several people in the audience, Lindy, Graham, and Aaron, have all said that the vMug Advantage for $200 can get you NSX Enterprise now as well.
I know. I forgot about that. That's a good point. So yeah, that's the other good way to get most of your VMware licensing is a vMug Advantage. Because I'm a partner and I get keys as being a partner, and I've got vExpert keys. I'm not a vMug Advantage subscriber, so that's why I didn't think of it. But that is a good point.
And Mike Burkhart is signed in using my name. Mike, you little. Yes, so absolutely, and Tim Davis is one of the NSX SEs, so he is also a source. Oh, and Lindy said there's 20% off on vMug Advantage right now.
Yeah, so I've always bugged Tim Davis for
everything,
barbecuing tips and NSX keys. Let's see here. So where was I? I don't know where I was. I was probably off on a tangent about how NSX is great, but
yeah, sorry about that. My bad.
That's okay. No, that's good. So, I as I'm kind of rebuilding my deployment out here, I'm gonna have the layered. I basically want to be able to take a VM that's sitting in my home lab, move it up to my cloud host, and never change the IP address. And I'm like just barely there to having that working. I just have to get some routing stuff figured out, and it's there. And that to me is super cool, because now it's almost like built-in DR, where if I really wanted to then just fully migrate the lab into the cloud, I wouldn't even have to change IP addresses. I'll just eventually change the gateway, and I'm done. And that's one of the really cool things about NSX is once you build this stuff in software and you can connect stuff all over the place, and it just kind of works. It's so powerful. Let's see. Anything else that I wanted to show? Oh, well, yeah, I do have Verny out here as well. So Verny is sort of I guess it was kind of thought as being the companion app for NSX. And in that you can, once you stand it up in your environment, it will sort of, watch your network for a while and kind of show you, what's going on. And then the real promise for it initially was, it will help you build firewall rules. And that is still true to an extent. It used to be, I guess, at some point you could capture a bunch of, flows in your environment, and then if you could verify those flows to see that they were correct, and then export them from Verny, and then import them into a firewall rule in NSX inside of your vSphere environment. You can still do that, but apparently you have to do it through some sort of a middleman of sorts, either using API calls or something to that effect. I'm working on this with a client today just to try to figure out, how best to do this so that they can, get their investment out of Verny and figure out that, what all what all is the best way to kind of build these firewall rules without having to completely recreate the wheel, because um, there's kind of you can build firewall rules directly in the firewall component of NSX, which is the distributed firewall, which is every single virtual NIC on your VMs has a firewall on it now because of installing NSX. But the really recommended way to build your rules is through the Service Composer and letting NSX Manager automatically apply rules based on your criteria that you set. Because if you're deploying this in a large scale environment, it's a lot easier to kind of build these policies in the composer and let the composer actually do the applying. But of course, with this kind of stuff, you have to be a little bit careful, because you are actually applying a firewall to a virtual machine interface, and you can shoot yourself in the foot. The one, oh, that's right. It's right here now. This used to be buried. This is an NSX 6.4, which is the latest one. This used to be buried inside of NSX Manager, but they've got it kind of pulled out here now. This is a big thing you need to pay attention to when you first install NSX. They have this little guy called the exclusion list, and that basically turns off the VNIC firewall on each VM that is a member of this list. And if you don't have things in here like, say vCenter or NSX Manager, if you were to come in here to the default firewall rule and change the default rule from allow to deny, you could actually block yourself out of everything, which would not,
Have you done that?
No, I haven't, but I've heard it's a call to GSS.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and that is actually when they in the first few releases of NSX, the default rule was set to deny, and so people were starting to turn this thing on and just locking themselves out of their environments, and so now in all subsequent releases, the default rule is set to allow. So they, but then that's why they pulled this out of here, to make sure that people know to, add their critical machines into the exclusion list. Where I got bit with this in my first production deployment of NSX was actually on a Microsoft Exchange server. We don't know exactly what happened, but it was random. NSX was randomly blocking Microsoft Outlook clients from updating their mailbox from the server. And it was completely random, no rhyme or reason to any of it. The only thing that fixed it was adding Exchange to the exclusion list. And because it was a production environment for a big business, we couldn't just leave it broken and then let the real techie people at VMware get in there and figure out what went wrong.
Right.
So we had to basically just go with the workaround as the solution. So that's one thing that I never found out what happened. But it's sort of it's a key piece of your NSX implementations, however you do it, if you're doing it in the cloud, if you're doing it on premise. Adding this stuff to the exclusion list is huge. Let's see.
Couple of quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that Service Composer doesn't play well with a multi-site scenario. Is this still true?
That is getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
So I don't know for certain on that. I mean, if you're talking about, if you are like doing the cross vCenter NSX connections, then it might, like if this NSX manager is talking to two separate vCenters, I'm not sure if that's what they mean, but it can probably. I would think as long as NSX Manager can interact with both of them, and there's a specific way you have to set up NSX for multiple vCenters. So it's not something that's just available by default. So you have to kind of properly engineer and design that out. I mean, this is one of the fights between NSX engineers, though, is there is a school of thought that says all rules should be built within the firewall window, and there's a school of thought that says all rules should be built using Service Composer. And not to, confuse things at all, but there's a third way of doing firewall rules directly inside of the Edge Services Gateway. So, there's no shortage of firewalls when it comes to NSX. You can apply security in a multitude of ways. And I've even worked with people where we deployed an Edge Services Gateway and using VLANs applied security to user endpoints. So the accounting department got a VLAN that connected to an Edge Services Gateway, and it was security restricted as to what it could get into.
Well, and then they just hairpinned all the traffic up to the Edge service.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was either that, because they wanted to apply kind of micro segmentation to their users. And instead of doing it, with a pair of hardware firewalls, we did it with, a pair of Edge Services Gateways.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it actually worked out pretty well, I think. Because they were going, because once they were it wasn't technically hairpinning because it wasn't ever going out of the VMs and coming back in.
Once you get, all right.
That's sort of the advantage of another advantage of NSX is once you're in the cluster, unless it has to go to another host to get to a machine, everything happens, at kernel speed. So, it's all just kind of right there. So, the only real caveat with that, though, is the Edge Services Gateways are not distributed throughout your cluster. So the Edge, you have to build the Edge gateways with high availability where it'll deploy a carbon copy of itself on another host, and you can use equal cost multipath routing or ECMP if you wanted to have it kind of automatically balanced between the two of them, and float. Otherwise, you can just do a full-on HA where it'll use one, and then if it detects one dies, it'll flip over to the other one. Just depends on how you want to balance your traffic out.
Gotcha.
But versus the distributed logical routers and everything that's distributed, it's actually spread through the cluster by default, and so it's naturally there. That's sort of the Achilles heel of the Edge Services Gateways, that it's not distributed. But again, it's funny to talk this in depth about NSX, and it's all sitting on stuff that I paid less than a few $1,000s for.
Right.
And like if people want to get this in their businesses, it's it runs like Cody, again, to call back to Cody. He's always saying if it runs this well in the lab, just imagine how well it'll run in your environment. If you're running on an all-flash array, it scales very well. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna run back to this a little bit here. So my last kind of pitch about OVH's services is this to me is the best part of running stuff in their cloud as opposed to other clouds. You have a dedicated host, it's yours. There's no meter running, and you can really build it the way you want, which is what I wanted when I started to get into this with them. And it also is crazy fast. I was only supposed to be getting like a 250 megabyte upload when I ran this test, according to my specs from them. So it's as speed goes, they're not short for bandwidth. The biggest word of caution I have for anybody building labs, even at home, is you have to use extremely good security practices. Security starts at home. Build secure VPN tunnels, use two-factor authentication. I started working with a service called SaaSPass, it's one of the lesser known two-factor authentication companies out there, but it works well. But when I first built my first OVH host, I left an RDP port open to a Windows VM, and the VM was hacked within 24 hours. And that was partly my fault for leaving the port open and having a really lame password. But and they didn't get into
4, 5, 6. What are you thinking?
Yeah, not quite, but almost. But they got into the VM and installed this like screen lock application, so I could still log in. So I think what actually happened, I think a bot found it and hacked it. I don't even think a real person got to the machine yet to do other stuff. I think it was some automated tool found it and hacked it. And so by the time I got there, nothing really bad had happened other than me not being able to get into the screen. So I just deleted the VM and went on my way. But it is something to be aware of, because when you start to extend your home lab thing into the actual cloud, you just you got to be really careful with this stuff, and you got to use good security practices. So some self-plugging. I started a blog series on building this out at OVH and how I was doing it, because it's not the simplest process to get a host from them and just plug it into your lab. You can there's some very specific steps you have to do. So I'm trying to detail that. And I started this series last November when I first got into this with them, and I'm now going to have to commit myself to finish it and get the whole thing out. It was when I first started doing it, I'm like, man, this could be like a 12-part series, and I only got 3 of them out. So blogging is not my forte. So last year I also started a podcast with the guy who's doing next week's vBrownBag, my good friend Tony Reeves. Tony and I have been friends since middle school, and we kind of both ended up in IT, and Tony's extremely popular on Twitter, and he's a great guy. So we started a podcast last year. I called it the GigaCast. And so if you having trouble sleeping, just search for GigaCast on iTunes, or get the feed, and give us a listen. We try to talk about the stuff that matters to us, and the little guys, because we're the little guys. We don't work for major corporations. We support small IT operations, and so we try to fill that gap of what's good stuff for small businesses that we can afford. Because as a VMware customer in the past and a partner now, I've always felt that VMware had a hard time meeting the small business needs, and so that's the gap that we're trying to fill, is helping small guys get what they need.
Very cool.
And then, so that's pretty much what I had. I think we're almost out of time. I don't know if that's true, but
two more questions.
All right.
One is, have you managed to lock yourself out of a cloud host? And if so, how easy is it to recover?
Yes, actually I have. This is sort of the saving grace of having, on the OVH host side anyways, the saving grace of having the management IP locked in so that you can't reuse it elsewhere actually allows you, they give you full IP KVM access to the host itself. So you just launch an IPMI session through Java or whatever on the browser, and you actually have console access to the host from OVH. So you can, change the network gateways around and get yourself back in. But nice. At one point I did break things so badly, I just went into the OVH control panel and I just said reinstall.
Wow, nice. Cool.
And it, of course, formats everything and starts over.
Right, yeah. Another question. So this might be a super long answer, but in 45 seconds or less, how does microsegmentation differ from PVLANs?
PVLANs, private VLANs?
Yeah.
Is that what that means? Oh,
yeah.
I'm not up on all the VLAN lingo. Microsegmentation, classic microsegmentation in NSX is you deploy an edge services gateway, and then underneath that you deploy potentially multiple distributed logical routers, and off of each one of those sub networks is a service. So you have the classic VMware web app and database tier, and each of those is in its own network, controlled by a distributed router, controlled by an edge services gateway.
Yeah, and I don't think you can do
it's much more than just VLANs. It's routing, it's firewalls, it's a whole stack of services.
Yeah, because you can't do port differentiation with it or anything. I mean, that's a big answer.
Yeah. You know what? That'd be a great question for Tim Davis.
There you go. Okay, so I think that's just about everything. Real quick for everybody that's still listening live, Lindy Grady is doing their own. This is a shameless plug, vMug Homelab series that Lindy is hosting. Anybody with a home lab using AWS Advantage want to be interviewed. If the answer to that is yes, I am posting Lindy's Gmail address in the chat channel. So reach out, and maybe we'll hear more about that in the future as well. Cool. Okay, so let me double check, make sure I didn't miss any questions. Everybody's talking about the vMug Advantage NSX licenses.
It's a great value. Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised when they tied NSX to it last year. I was like, wow, that's really nice.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Micros. Okay, good. Lots of comments saying thank you very much. Awesome job. Lot of NSX questions. We should do another one just on you talking about NSX.
I would love that.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll get that set up on the back end as well then too.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. We are good.
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Chris, and again, thanks to Cody DeArkland for getting this kicked off. And,
I'm totally good.
Everybody listen to Tony next week. He's going to go crazy on vSAN. So.
Oh, fun! Actually, am I going to be able to host that one? I think I will be hosting that one. Good. I need to learn more about vSAN myself.
Yeah, Tony is the vSAN king. So I've got NSX covered. He's got vSAN covered. Together, we own the whole stack. So.
With your powers combined, you make Captain Planet.
Yes, exactly.
Wait. Cool, Britton. Thank you very much for taking the time out to do this tonight. We really appreciate it.
It was awesome. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.